Welcome to the Intimate Marriage Podcast, where I teach educated, successful couples how to have incredible, passionate relationships so that you can stop compromising and start feeling fully alive in your relationship. I'm Alexandra Stockwell, aka the Intimacy Doctor. I'm a physician, a relationship and intimacy coach, and I'm an intimate marriage expert. My husband and I have been married for 26 years. We have 4 children and full professional lives, and we've created an amazing marriage. I've shown hundreds of couples how to do so as well. So if you want to deepen your understanding of your own relationship and learn to access new heights of emotional, sensual, and erotic intimacy, you're in the right place. I will show you how. Now, let's dive in. Well, this is going to be a really special interview. I've never done an interview like this, and I've never heard one on anyone else's podcast, because today I welcome to the conversation Dr. Jacqueline Sherman, who is somewhere in the East Coast. I don't even know where. And her husband, Paul Sherman, who's joining us from Dubai on the weekend during a military deployment. So, Paul, why don't you just say a little bit about who you are and where you are in life in this moment?
Okay, thank you. So I'm Paul Sherman. I mean, I give the whole government name, Paul Maurice Sherman, and I'm active duty Navy. I'm a senior chief. I've been in the Navy for 18 years. Born and raised out of Jacksonville, Florida, and currently I'm deployed to the country of Bahrain, which is in the Arabian Gulf. And I've been here since August of 2020.
You've been there since August of 2020, and since this episode will exist in perpetuity, let's be clear, it is March of 2023.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I am so grateful for your service, and also on a smaller scale, but very genuinely, for joining us in this conversation, which it did take a little bit to coordinate, which makes it even more delicious. Since we're going to be talking relationships and intimacy, I feel like this has been an especially extended and varied foreplay in the logistical department to be able to have this conversation. And Dr. Jack, tell us about you, mostly because I love when you express it.
So my name is Dr. Jacqueline Sherman. My friends, clients, and colleagues call me Dr. Jack. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist by trade, but I am also an intimacy and relationship coach. And I really specialize in helping women to build sexual confidence. And I help couples all over the world to have better intimacy, to improve their intimacy. And I like to highlight both emotional as well as physical, because what we know is that the emotional intimacy is really the foundation of the relationship. So I love what I do, and I'm happy to be here. I'm really excited about this interview.
Okay, and my understanding is that the two of you haven't been interviewed together before. Is that right?
Never.
First time.
Okay. All right.
You're popping our cherry.
I love it. Popping your podcast cherry. Okay, so you've been in the Navy for 18 years, Paul. That means that your whole relationship has included you being in the military. Is that right?
Absolutely.
So where did you meet?
We met in Vegas.
Whichever one. In Vegas, okay. Were you on a girls' weekend and you're on a guys' weekend?
That's exactly how it went down.
Bingo.
Okay, so tell us the story.
All right. So there we were. Okay. So I'm on my guys' trip. My childhood friend had strongly requested that I attend this trip. He said it's going to be, best time of your life. It's going to change your life. And at that time, I was stationed in Virginia. And so fast forward, I ended up succumbing to the peer pressure, and I got to Vegas. And so I think either the first or the second day, he said, "Hey, let's go to this restaurant where I'm meeting up with a female friend of mine or lady friend of mine who he knew back from Jacksonville, who's actually a friend, a common friend between Jacqueline and myself." And so we get to the restaurant prior to going to a pool party, and then I met Jackie, and here we are. Yeah.
Amazing. And were you already a psychologist, sex and intimacy coach?
Yeah. So he mentioned that he was living in Virginia. I was in graduate school getting my PhD in Virginia. And so we lived about like 20 minutes away from each other. And I had just moved there. And so it was my first year of a 5-year program. So I knew no one in Virginia, really outside of my cohort and then now him. So yeah, when I met him, I was just excited because I'm like, oh, okay, I can now, have a potential friend, someone to hang out with in Virginia. And we didn't continue to hang out in Vegas, but when we got back to Virginia, he took me to Hooters. We had oysters and wings, and then it was history from there.
Okay, that is so amazing. And being in a program, developing your expertise, and you have this beautiful style, Dr. Jack, of being like really professional and fairly precise in what you say, and definitely getting into the juicy details in a very explicit and nuanced way. I just think you have this amazing blend of really being professional and really being juicy. So here you are doing this. How does someone in the military fit into that? Because that's a super different vibe.
Such a different vibe. You know what's interesting? When I got to Norfolk, I think, yeah, I haven't been there. Right. They're very particular about how it's said there. So I wanted to get it right. But when I got there, my sister told me, she was like, "You're going to meet a military man and get married." And I was like, "Military man?" That I actually said, like, that's not my vibe. I don't even know anything about that world. And that's exactly what happened. And I think our worlds were so completely different. But I think that made it a really interesting relationship. Like, I think we had a lot to talk about and learn from one another because we came from two completely different worlds. My husband, right after high school, went straight into the military and just continued to excel. And so that was like the military culture was what he knew. And as my family would say, like, I was a career student. So after high school, I had been in school for forever. And hadn't even really, started a career. And so academia was my world. And so I think that we leaned into like that just being really different for both of us. But I think that it was as well.
Okay, well, the way that you say that, we want what she's having. But in fact, the military and academia have, they're compatible values, but very different top priorities. Or I want to be careful how I say it. In both places, there's ambition, integrity, personal development, a certain amount of collaboration. So there is a certain amount of similarity, but the way that it's executed has a really different feel. So what was it like having it be something that made for good fuel for your relationship rather than essentially being a context for disconnection?
I'll jump in, babe, and then I'm interested in your perspective. I think that both of us had a certain level of discipline that was required for us to do what we were doing in our individual lives. And so I think that, for example, when my husband went on his first deployment, not saying that there's anything wrong with this, but, I wasn't just sitting around waiting for him to come home, missing him. Like, I was working on my dissertation. I was going to internships. Like, I was very, very busy. making sure that I was meeting my own personal goals. And so I think that that actually really helped our relationship. And even to this day, we're in a long distance relationship, but, I've launched a physical product while he has been gone on deployment. Like, I've started a coaching career. So I think that I have really leaned into the military partner slash spouse role in a way that has, I think, really, like, I've occupied my time well and stayed really busy. And I think that that has helped our relationship a lot. I'm interested to know what you think, though.
That is a question that I think I can answer in very shortly. That we accepted the backgrounds that well, I won't say backgrounds. We accepted the present tense that we were in, and I think we were curious enough to inquire about what each other was doing and what it looked like. And we just, for lack of better words, we just went with the flow of things.
I think that's really amazing. When my husband and I, we've been married for 27 years and we met in medical school. So we were in the same training for sure. But there was a point when we were dating where we would have either broken up or moved towards getting engaged, which is what we did. But before doing that, it was really important to me that my husband take a philosophy class because that was my background and he knew nothing about that. And it was important for him that I take this self-defense program that he had taught in because it was a transformational program, but it meant that I needed to be more in my body and more aware of safety in the way that he moved through life as a result of being a self-defense instructor and as like his summer job and while he was in college. And there was a way in which each of us doing that allowed us to not really take up residence, but at least have one foot in the other person's world in order to be able to connect. And so I'm hearing that the two of you didn't do it in terms of the activities, but you did it in terms of being disciplined, being clear what the next steps are, and being really motivated to get there. Is that the right impression?
Yeah. So I think what you just brought up struck something that is very prevalent in our relationship, and that is buying into what the other person's strengths and passions are. And so, and not neglecting or abstaining to those things, right? So, for instance, my wife has a lot to offer in regards to her professional background, her research, and her experience. And so, I admired that initially when I met her, when I found out she was in her PhD program for psychology. And me as a senior enlisted leader or a senior enlisted person in the Navy, I interact with many people. I influence up the chain of command. I know I'm using military jargon or terminology now, but I influence, mentor up the chain of command, to my peers and then down. And so I was inquisitive enough to, and Jackie can back me up on this. I would have situations when I say, "Hey, babe, so I got this going on. Give me some insight on how I can tackle this, or I can utilize some of the tools you have to be an influence and create buy-in from people, because there's a lot of buy-in when it comes to leadership. And where I'm at in this point in my career has a lot to do with leadership and influence. And one of the largest or greatest things about being a great leader is being a great listener. And I think psychologists are trained listeners. They listen to understand, and then provide feedback, and a level of understanding and thought process that I think can create buy-in. And that is every day of my life, in this uniform. And so I bought into that. And I think that's one way how we have connected we've connected both of our worlds, from my aspect, and have created some intimacy there that we both can understand. Like, hey, I can go to my wife for this, and it applies to my job. I know that was a loaded response, but I hope it makes sense.
It absolutely does. And it almost takes my breath away. I was just thinking, if we lived in a world where it was normal to have the attitude that you've just expressed, our world would be so different. The state of marriages would be so different. But it isn't, well, it may be normal, but it's not common. So I'd like to ask you about it. I'm not hearing anything at all about being intimidated by Dr. Jack's education and accomplishment, or in thinking, I mean, you're a very ambitious person who's risen through the ranks in the military, very clear what the next goals are, I'm presuming, and how to meet them. So to me, like, it feels so great when you say it, but it also takes a special attitude to be a rising star and turn to your wife who's non-military and has never been deployed, has never been to boot camp, and ask her for guidance. Will you just take us into your mind? Have you always been that way?
Yes.
Do you have a father figure who modeled that? Like, it's an incredible quality.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. Because for a while I feel kind of lonely in that area where, there's statements out there that says once you get to a place and you feel there's nothing else to learn, then you're not growing. And and as I've been in this uniform, I can't say I don't remember how I thought as an 18-year-old and below, but I utilize my resources. I utilize my resources regardless of where I'm at. I'm very I'm humble enough to know that I don't have every answer. I'm humble enough to know that I have areas of improvement where I can fill up those areas with people and technology and insight from other areas, and I can be able to enhance myself. And I'm grateful enough to know that I have a life partner that can assist me with those things that I'm just not equipped with, whether it's experience, whether it's academia. And once again, it boils down to being humble and have enough humility to know that I don't have those answers. And can you provide some insight?
Well, that is the kind of leadership we want in the military and everywhere else. It's amazing. Are you hearing anything that you haven't heard before, Dr. Jack? Or did you already know all of this? It's like, oh yeah, I've heard that. Nice to hear it again, but it's familiar.
I'm over here admiring him. One, because he looks really sexy, but two,
yes, that is for sure.
but two, the words that he's speaking, I haven't actually heard him say those words that directly before. And so it feels really, really good because we have not always been in that place. I think that there was some adjusting early on in our relationship. We met almost 10 years ago now. And so I think that our relationship has over time gotten to a place where we just both respect each other's strengths, and do not find them at all intimidating, but more so lean on each other in ways that I feel like makes us as a couple much stronger. So it's really, really nice to hear. And I don't think he's said it in those words before.
It's beautiful. And I'm thinking for you, I don't know if this is the parallel, but it's where my mind is going. You specialize in intimacy, in sex, in really being able to tend the delicious, vulnerable, physical aspects of a relationship. And you've married someone who is away a good percentage of the time. How have you navigated that?
Yeah, so I think that has been challenging in our relationship, but I feel like it has grown us in so many ways. Originally, and we don't talk about this a lot, but the deployment that he's currently on, or where he's currently stationed, it originally started with he was going to be gone for 1 year. And 1 year was very digestible for me. And then it changed to 2 years, and then it changed to 3 years. And so I did not think that we would be apart so long. And I think that if someone would have told me, it's going to be 3 years initially, I think I would have been really freaking out. But I think that this time has just transformed our intimacy in ways where communication, I feel like, has been the strongest pillar in our intimacy. Where I think before it was quality time and it was physical touch, and we've had to shift. And I think as a result of that, we've had much deeper conversations. I think that we've learned a lot about each other, and how strong we are independently as well as together. Because I think that navigating, this time apart has led us to miss each other a lot. And some of the qualities or just the quirks that we have, the things that we used to do, that maybe we wouldn't have had as much gratitude for. Like, I think that we really get to pause and say, like, hey, like, for example, I miss going to the grocery store with him, like the simplest thing. Right. And I think because of that, we really do take the moments that we do have. We hold them in high regard. And I'm interested to see what you have to say, but I also feel like even connecting, on a more sexual level, we've had to get really creative and both be outside of our comfort zones in order to connect to that in that way. But because we want to intentionally prioritize that aspect of our relationship, it's been something that we both, get excited to do. And so I think on a lot of different levels, we've just had to get creative, but also I think our communication is stronger than it has ever been, because it's, it's the only way that we have to communicate. And so I think that we really, really make sure to be gentle with each other, and have patience with each other, especially when there's moments of disagreement.
All right. So I'm going to try and articulate this in very, sharp, short fashion. But
although we don't have a military standard for how concise, how sharp you are. Yeah. But go ahead if that's what you'd like.
So that's one thing I try to work on, is just being clear, concise, and not very long-winded, right? And I hate to paraphrase a statement that I read or a study that, people only pay attention to about the first 17 seconds of what you have to say. Then they kind of start to wander off. But anyway, I digress. So, so our level of intimacy we weren't prepared. We were not prepared. And I think, fortunately,
you mean for the separation?
Oh, correct. Yeah, we weren't
prepared
as I think we were. And fortunately, ironically, my wife's business and intimacy actually paid off as she continued to dive deeper into her business, because she wasn't as far as I understand, she wasn't as educated on intimacy and things to do to enhance your intimacy between a husband and wife or partner, significant other, until she got into this business. And so ironically, while we are separated, she ended up gaining tools to enhance that. And so me, as the role that I've been in our relationship, I've naturally been a leader in many aspects, and I've had to pass the baton to her to be a leader in intimacy and take on certain ideas that can at least maintain where we were when I left, or kind of enhance where we were, or enhance what we have since I've been gone. And so you know, I think we can speak on the level of, uh, things we can do virtually, such as, phone sex, which is something that I just plainly I wasn't the most comfortable with initially. It wasn't something that my female friends or guy friends really talked about doing, but understanding that, hey, your relationship is an anomaly. Name one, two, three, four friends that have been in a relationship, not only maybe a month away from each other, but 3 years. And so my wife is very, very in line with things that you could do to keep things spicy, continue to maintain a connection, or make a greater connection between a couple while they're separated. And I had to, because I knew it was so important to her. I had to buy into those things and put myself in. I had to be comfortable with being uncomfortable and try to make myself comfortable in those clothes since I've been gone.
That's really phenomenal to hear you express that. And I just love your presence on Instagram, Dr. Jack. I mean, one of the ways that we've gotten to know one another. This is actually our first conversation, but we've become familiar with one another that way. And so I'm just reminded how beautifully you talk about the importance of talking about sex with your partner and also about scheduling sex, two things that I also advocate for very strongly, but there's a quality when you talk about them that I feel like it's partly accounted for, because I'm imagining that those are things that just had to be a part of your relationship to have the success while you're long distance. Do you want to say anything about that?
Yeah. One, thank you for your compliments. And I think that our conversations around sex and physical intimacy have probably been the biggest area that we have grown regarding our intimacy. Because I think that when we first started having these conversations, they were hard. They were very challenging. I'm very transparent about sharing that when we initially started talking about sex in depth, it was associated with me experiencing a miscarriage. And it was before he left to go on deployment. And so those conversations were really.
Wait.
Mhm.
Can I just interject? How was it that you were having conversations about sex in depth in the context of having a miscarriage? Will you just connect the dots? Because it's not an obvious association.
Yeah, absolutely. So I experienced a miscarriage. And after that, there was a lot of grief that we had to navigate as a couple. Also, I grieved very differently than my husband.
Yes, of
And he
course.
was very optimistic, as he usually is, right? Cup half full. And I was really depressed. And we were in couples therapy navigating that, but we weren't talking about in couples therapy the intimate part of our relationship. And I was really at that time afraid to get pregnant again. He was getting ready to leave soon for his deployment. I had gained a lot of weight from the pregnancy and wasn't no longer really connected to my body. And I felt like my body had let me down. And navigating all of those emotions,
Which is
Mhm.
a very hard way to feel and feel erotically alive.
Exactly, exactly. And it was hard to connect to my desire. It was hard to explain, why things had changed. We both felt that things had changed, but I think giving it language was, I think, really hard for us. And so we had to have some of the most honest, raw conversations that we ever have had regarding sex. And we were very unexperienced about talking about sex in that detail um, up to that point. And so we had to do a lot of practicing to make those conversations not feel as heavy, not feel as difficult. And I think that these last several years, we are in a completely different place when it comes to talking about sex. But we really, went through a major stressor to get here. And I share with people that, there may be some people that can relate to experiencing a trauma in the relationship, like a miscarriage. It can be grief. It can be, we've lost someone, and now, my relationship with sex has changed, and therefore our relationship to sex has changed. It could be, we've had kids and now things have changed. It could be, we're really busy at work. And so I think that in general, a lot of couples do come to a point in their relationship where the physical intimacy changes and they don't have the language to discuss it in a way that actually brings them closer together. And so I think that we navigated that and are still continuing to do so, but we're in a much different place.
Amazing. And that was how long ago?
That was in
your miscarriage?
That was in 2019.
Okay, so to me, that seems actually really quick to have navigated that plus deployment. That is good communication Olympics.
I received that.
That is amazing. Okay. Well, in every interview that I do, because I so deeply believe that intimate relationships are the ultimate vehicle for personal growth, I ask what you've learned about yourself in the context of being married. So let me ask you first, Paul, what have you learned about yourself as a result of being married to Dr. Jack?
Thank you for that question. What I've learned the most about myself being married to my wife is being in tune with emotions. Okay. Listening to understand versus listening to respond. Being empathetic and sympathetic, because certain things I can identify with why my wife might respond to certain situations the way she does, and that's where the sympathy comes into effect, or it comes into play. And then the empathetic part, which are things that I have absolutely no experience with, no direct understanding, and when she goes through it, I rather than me shame her or make her feel isolated, I have to practice empathy, and that takes a lot of work. And I will be honest enough to say that I've had to learn to condition myself to not be so stubborn in my way of thinking, especially when it comes to dealing with my wife, because as weird as it sounds, we're not that much alike. We are not that much alike. We really aren't. We are clear opposites in ways of thinking, how we go about life, how we want to impact the world, how we lead as individuals, how we want the world to look at us. And so I've had to really reflect on how I think and try to be more in tune with her rather than me not be stuck in my own ways. That has probably been the greatest part of work that I maintain on the daily, because we are very opposite, which isn't such a bad thing. It's not a bad thing at all.
No, it sounds pretty powerful and magnetic, actually, as you speak about it. What about you, Dr. Jack? What have you learned about yourself as a result of being married to Paul?
Yeah, so I've never had anyone call out my BS the way they has. And I'm grateful for it, because I think that, your partner is supposed to be able to hold that mirror up and show you the parts of yourself that are ugly, that you don't like, that would be helpful to change in order to be a better person. And and to push you outside of your comfort zone. And I think that he's done all of those things. I think that mostly what I've learned from him is to be more direct. That has helped me and served me in so many ways in my business. I think just naturally, a people pleaser. And as a result of adopting some of the ways that he operates in this world, I've lost some friends. Some of the relationships that I've had with people in my life have changed because I've implemented certain boundaries. But I feel like I'm showing up in my integrity a whole lot more because of the influence that he's had in my life. And so I'm appreciative with how assertive he can be, how direct that he can be, and his willingness to let people know exactly how he feels in a really honest fashion. And I wasn't always able to do that in certain relationships with people. And that has been a wonderful tool that I've been able to utilize, not only in my business, but also just, in my friendships, and in my family relationships and my relationships with my colleagues as well.
I feel like each of you have said so many different things that I could have about 20 follow-up questions for. And actually, I'm going to ask you about the possibility of that when we're done recording. But this really is the time to pivot. Dr. Jack, you're such a superb spokeswoman for intimacy, sex, connection, communication, both for couples and for women. And your Sexfirmation cards are just such a gorgeous product. Do you want to say something about that? I feel like that for somebody listening who just wants a piece of what the two of you have, that at least for a woman, that's a really great way to move towards her version of that in her life. Do you agree with that?
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Sexfirmation cards are, and I may even get emotional when I say this, but I feel like they're the baby that we haven't had yet, in so many ways. Because I feel like the techniques that I utilized in creating the card deck is, I feel like, what helped us to get our intimacy back on track after I experienced a miscarriage. And so Sexfirmation cards are a 3-step process to help women to build better sexual confidence as well as enhancing their intimacy. And it does so with the intentionality behind starting with the mindset, starting with our thoughts, which I think oftentimes gets neglected when we're thinking about, our sexual wellness. And so there's 25 self-reflection cards that help women to actually journal and work through mindset blocks that may be impacting their ability to have the intimacy that they want. And then there's 25 conversation cards. That's step 2. You can do those with a partner, right? To build your communication skills when it comes to talking about sex. Or you can actually utilize them with like a group of girlfriends. So for example, I used them during a Valentine's Day event recently, and we had so much fun. And we all left feeling like more empowered and more confident in our ability to talk about sex. And then step 3 is exploration cards. So there's 10 cards to get you connected to your body. Oftentimes we're moving through the world on autopilot. We're not slowing down enough to get connected to our body and to get centered in that way. So there's a mindful self-love practice. There's a mindful masturbation practice. There's encouragement to move in a pleasurable and erotic way. And so the 3 steps again are self-reflection, conversation, and exploration. And Sexfirmation cards, again, they are the first sexual wellness card deck for women. And they are my baby. And I'm so proud of how they've helped women to really create a sexual self-care practice that's practical and workable.
Amazing. And I know they're beautifully packaged, so there's nothing cheesy and nothing sleazy about them. They are this like luscious, luxurious, high-end experience.
Thank
It's just
you.
wonderful. I'd love to ask actually each of you, how you would define sexual confidence. I think we all know that we want to have confidence in the realm of sexuality, but I actually have never encountered actually talking about what that would mean. And it seems like the right moment to have that conversation. So, since the cards are designed to help with sexual confidence, how would you describe that? Dr. Jack first?
Yeah. So when I think about someone who's sexually confident, I think about someone who knows what is true. And what I mean by that is they're not distracted by the outside world, by the noise, by the influence that tells us that we're not enough, that we can't ask for what we want and deserve. But they are willing to have the uncomfortable conversations, to ask, directly for what it is that they want. They understand that their body may not be perfect, but it is certainly enough and deserving of pleasure. And so I think that the more that we know what is true about who we are as a being and what we deserve, the more confident we are.
Amazing. I don't presume you've thought about it as much or have a polished response, Paul. Maybe you do. But how would you define sexual confidence?
Great point, Alexandra, because I'm not a professional in this field. But I think that when it comes to, confidence is confidence, whether it's sexual, whether it's, job related. It is knowing what you bring to the table. And specifically when it comes to your when it comes to your partner, um, there's a balance between knowing what you can do, and also requesting what your partner would like for you to do, and then try your best to execute those things, right? And I think those will breed confidence in yourself over time. But I think it boils down to what you feel you bring to the table, unadulterated, and not only just rest on those loyals, but also try to push yourself into areas where you're not the most privy to, areas of uncomfortableness, and see if you can still um, uh, create the same results.
Okay, well, it's awesome. And I absolutely hope that this conversation functions as an invitation to you as you're listening to lean in, and try something new and build your confidence, whether you get the Sexfirmation cards to help you do that, or you just take what you've heard in the vibe of this conversation. Hear how far confidence can take you, because what the two of you have navigated, and I'm sure that it didn't feel this way all the time, but that you've achieved this as a general feeling right now of grace and harmony and a self-acceptance and awareness, and and an acceptance and awareness of one another. It's just incredible to be in the presence of what lives in your marriage. And I'm so grateful that you each on the East Coast and in Dubai made it possible to have this conversation together. If somebody wants to follow up with Paul, well, tough luck, I assume. But if somebody wants to follow up with Dr. Jack, all the information is in this. You're agreeing with that, Paul. Okay, good. I didn't check first, but that was my sense. And Dr. Jack, all of your information is in the show notes. And anything you want to add as we conclude here?
Yeah. So first, Alexandra, thank you so much for just creating this space for couples to be able to have just a very different type of conversation. So thank you so much for reaching out and asking us to be a part of the Intimate Marriage Podcast. I really enjoyed this conversation. And to be honest, initially I was really afraid to be interviewed with my husband. It's just something that we've never done. And now I am so thankful for this opportunity. I think that we'll be able to listen back to this episode for years on years to come, and really just be thankful of how much we've grown and that we've been able to just take the opportunity to kind of pause what's happening now. And I think it's just going to be an amazing opportunity to reflect later.
I'm so glad. I really am. Any last words from you, Paul?
Oh, I think I've had a great experience.
All right. Well, thank you for pushing beyond your comfort zone, not knowing what you were showing up to. And in some ways, none of the three of us did, because every conversation is a unique one. And again, I'm just incredibly grateful that you're both here sharing in such an authentic way.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Well, that was an amazing conversation. And as a result, we forgot to mention the discount code that Dr. Jack created just for you. So first of all, Dr. Jack, thank you for generously sharing that with the Intimate Marriage Podcast audience. And will you say the website?
Absolutely. So if you're interested in Sexfirmation cards, you can go to www.drjac.co/shop. So that's Dr. Jack .co/shop to grab Sexfirmation cards, and go ahead and use the code IMP for Intimate Marriage Podcast 15. So IMP 15 to get 15% off.
If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to leave the Intimate Marriage Podcast a 5-star rating and review. And if you want fun, effective instruction on how to create a lifelong, passionate marriage, the Aligned and Hot Marriage program was created for you. This is my signature program, and it contains all the best practices I have developed. I've applied them in my own marriage with great success, and seen how helpful they are for the hundreds of couples I have coached. The Aligned and Hot Marriage program will give you everything you need to transform your marriage, turn it on, and feel more connected than ever in just 8 weeks. Go to alignedhotmarriage.com and get started today.